Hey, Wholeness, this is Josh from Interskilled, and today I have Stan Kurtz with me. Stan, what's going on today?
How are you, Josh? What's going on? Lots of things as always, and life is pretty darn good.
Well, cool. So,
Yeah.
who is this Stan character? What kind of work does he do?
Well, it started for me when my son was sick. It really started when my mom died of cancer when I was a kid. That was like the thing that broke my heart the most, is watching her deteriorate for 5 years with lung cancer, and she went through chemo and radiation. And I was obviously obsessed with that and with her and losing her. And then later, fast forward, my son was diagnosed with autism and seizures and right side muscle weakness and distended belly and sensory integration processing disorder and gross motor delays, fine motor delays, no eye contact, things like that. And I was really depressed. And when they told me, they literally said that you can expect this to be lifelong, difficult, and that your life's going to be hard. And I took it. I took that as the prescription, the curse. And I know what it was like to, be bedridden and depressed. And I ended up going to a conference, which I didn't want to go to, but somebody said that there was words that got through my fog, which were something like, just go. And I went, and the first speaker showed a slide. It was a scientist, and he showed a slide saying that children with autism have high copper levels. And I'm sitting there like, what? What does that have to do with a incurable neurological condition? And immediately, like, data was coming in like, are these kids sick? And are they sick and they don't speak, so they get overlooked? And I'm like, that's unconscionable. That's crazy. And afterwards, I talked to that researcher and I said, hey, are you saying that these kids have high copper, they need more zinc, and the zinc flushes out the copper, and that's your presentation? He goes, that's my presentation. That's the work I did. And I'm like, how many other studies are there like this for this condition? He goes, there's a lot. And that pushed me into, well, I need to find all of them. And I met another researcher. He introduced me to a woman who was actually on the spectrum, but loved to obsess over the science. And I said to her, hi, this is a picture of my son, and I'm a dad. I want to get him out of this. What do I do? How do I get all the science? I just want all the science. And she said, I'll teach you, but I'm going to charge you. And I'm like, sure. And she's like, $10 an hour. And I'm like, sure, and and I basically, she lived it really meagerly, and I ended up paying her trailer park rent for 12 months. She worked with me for about 30 days, taught me how to do searches in PubMed, which is the NIH housed database for all peer reviewed or reviewed studies, peer reviewed studies. And I found 750 studies that showed that these kids were biologically sick. And it was shocking and heartbreaking and caused anger and, a lot of other things, but it woke me up. And that was the most important thing. And then I spent the next 15 months finding the studies, downloading the studies, reading the studies, typing in one word at a time to understand what the Latin meant, allele lymphoid nodular hypoplasia, like one word at a time to figure out what it meant. So I learned the language. And then I was researching the researchers to see what else they published, to see what are their motives. What else have they done? Is it a establishment based study versus someone who's chasing after truth for the sake of maybe their own child or for the sake of humanity? And I learned to discern science, which is a big deal because today, somebody will say trust the science. Well, science is like French. You can say anything you want in science. You can, and so it's very important to understand the motives of the person in the study, because you're basically asking a question that you're trying to find an answer to. Some people want to have an answer and they create the question to publish that answer. So to discern science and just read the language and to get the data for the sake of, in this case, of the love of my son, I did that. It took 15 months to find the studies, download, read them. And then at that point, I had a spreadsheet of what are the things we know? What are the ways to take care of those things that are most safe and effective? Natural first, and then potentially more risky. And once I started doing that, we tested our son. And then from there, I found out the little nuances based on what the science suggested, what was in this specific child, and what should you do with that. And then I started an approach when he turned 3, which was 15 months after his first diagnosis. At that point, he had 3 diagnoses. When he turned 3, it was his official, gold stamped, welcome to autism diagnosis. And then that's when I started working on him on his 3rd birthday. And then by the time he was 3 years, 4 months, there was no discernible symptoms. And that year, he lost his diagnosis completely. Today, he's 25 years old, and he's ranked number 2 in the world in professional competitive robotics 250-pound level, which is a show you might know called BattleBots. Seasons have ended, but in the last season, he was ranked number 2 going into the latter half of the fighting. So, but the weird thing that happened, there's so many wake ups and weird things, but the next thing that happened is my son went off to school because he's well. Excuse me. And then I had to figure out what to do because I didn't want to be a capitalist, because I really saw the pattern of big establishment is not necessarily as heart-filled for your child as you are. That's the way I'll say it. And as a workaholic and having my own childhood trauma that was unresolved, I was very susceptible to give up that to somebody that was said to be the expert. And what I learned in doing that is I had a blind spot. The blind spot was not being accountable for looking at the nuances of everything that's happening to my child. And the second is that I was operating under old trauma that I hadn't taken care of. So this event helped to unravel some major things in me that were a blind spot. From a spiritual perspective, what I learned is that I was delivered my mother having cancer to show me that the traditional didn't work. I was delivered my son to show me that I need to take better care of my life and my own stuff. He taught me what I was, and still continues to teach me, the things in trauma I need to unravel to have my full self. And one of the things I did after my son recovered, and I've helped thousands of families on the spectrum over the years, and it led to much greater, wider, this isn't about autism today, this is about humans that are being capitalized on. But what I saw in it is I would ask people that recovered, what did you do? Because I want to see if I missed something. And I also want to see what the patterns are, because I'm really good at patterns. My base skills are, I'm a really good troubleshooter. I'm relatively fearless, and I'm really good with patterns. Like I don't memorize the studies word for word. I don't have photographic memory, but I can tell you that the average person's hair mercury is 3.8 micrograms per gram, and the average child on the spectrum is 0.47 micrograms per gram, which tells you that coming out their hair, there is a mercury excretion issue. So that was like a little box to say, okay, there's an issue there. Let's figure out what that might be and how do we work on it. So what I found when I was talking to those families, what they did, there were 2 things that were common across all the families. That's it, just 2. And there's lots of things that you need to do to help a complex situation like that. But the one thing was Epsom salt baths, which I thought were pretty innocuous, but we did that. And everyone I talked to did that. So that was something it's not the thing, but it is a base thing, apparently, according to the data that I found in inquiry. But the second thing was they all changed their thinking. They talked about that either they had a spiritual awakening or they changed their approach to life. And I know a lot of people that didn't have a child that recovered that didn't approach life differently. And with that, I'm really good with patterns and signals. And that's also kind of a link to my own spirituality, is like, is this telling me that I needed to change? Is this telling me that I had something unresolved to take care of? And I totally believe that's true. And anything that's still left over, whether it's him or anyone that I can't reach, I look to myself and say, what is my blind spot? What am I attached to? What haven't I resolved inside myself to see what's in front of me? So everyone I get in contact with, I love them like I do and I work for them the same way I would for my child. And that is a promise that I made. We didn't talk about this, but when things were going well and then kind of took a dip before he really had the breakthrough, and I was in the dip and feeling a lot of anxiety, and my wife at the time, she questioned me saying, are you sure you know what you're doing? And I'm like, yeah, with a little blank look on my face, like, holy shit, I really don't like this question and I need to get out of here because I'm not telling the full truth. That's who I was at the time. I went in the other room and I just broke down. I cried. And I'm like, because it was the disintegrity to my wife's face, and it was the not wanting to let go of what my intuition was telling me. And I didn't have the vocabulary or the presence to express both and ask for her permission to continue as a partner. So that's on me. So what I did do, which was extremely valuable, is I cried and I prayed to God. It was like my first honest prayer was, please don't screw me on this. This is what I said. This is me then. I said, please don't screw me on this. If you help me help my son, I will help whoever you put in front of me. And apparently I really, really meant it. And the reason I know that is I just watch myself. I don't necessarily have to believe my own thinking. I believe an action tells you the real. And I watch my actions, and this is how I am with everyone in front of me. So that's kind of what got me here. And when he went back to school, and I was telling you I didn't go back to business, I thought in my mind at the time, I had the wherewithal to go, okay, what are the things that you want to do? Well, I want to stay in the mindset of kids. I want to expand on what I've learned, because I've just spent like 15 months full time, showering very little, shaving I was all in. I'm like, my motor was in that direction. So how do I continue this? So I said, what business could I be in where I could just sit there in front of the computer and read studies, hang out with kids? I ended up buying a preschool, and I had 40 kids. It was licensed for 45. I bought it with 40. The year prior I got there were 77 prescription meds being used on 40 kids across 12 months. And I don't think that's an unusual number out there, but it was very shocking to me. And what I saw was little bits and pieces of my son and these kids. Like, this one had eczema, this one had irritability, this one was biting, this one wasn't paying attention, this one had hyperactivity, this one had motor skill issues, this one had sensory process. I'm like, it's like my son scattered across 40 kids. So what ended up happening is I had the idea. It was crazy. It was like, why don't I introduce the same food program that I made for Ethan? That was like the first part of it, is like, how can you affect things in food? That's pretty safe. So everyone was like, are you crazy? Plus, the other thing is that what I learned is that in California, you cannot have a preschool license unless you feed kids milk and wheat. That's what it was. You had to follow the food pyramid or you lose your license. And when licensing comes, where do they go first? Not to see if some kid's hanging in the back on a swing. They check the refrigerator. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like the food Gestapo. And I'm like, how riddled is the world with trying to make our kids small, or us small? And I've had many revelations since then that are all, to me, shocking on top of shock on top of shocking, but also helps to keep me motivated, because for some reason in the middle of this, I was always curious about people. I was always into psychology, but this deep love of humans has come over me, and it is nonstop. Somebody comes in the door and my heart is 100% open. I don't know if 100% is the right word, but I am filled with love of what's not only for humans, but what is happening that is fueled by humans, probably, that they're doing to each other. Yeah, I know there's a whole thing there, and I'm open, by the way. I see evidence to the contrary, actually, but I'm just saying it for terms of discussion for the average person that's listening. I don't want to totally blow them out of the water, but there is something going on here that is nuts. And as someone who has some knowledge, I just can't turn my back to it. And I know a lot of parents, and I've had this, this discussion with people like, why are you still doing this? Most people took their kid and they shuffled off and they said, goodbye, that community. And I'm like, I don't understand how anyone could do that knowing what's going on. And so I spend my days researching and it's not about autism. And I'm not talking certainly not about the superpower of autism. I'm not talking to Elon Musk autism. And I have my own version and I leverage that. But I'm talking about anything biological inside a person that's slowing them down from being their full selves in both mind, body, and spirit. That's what I'm researching. I am wanting to understand what the best possible human potential is and how to find it where it is and how to help people get there. So that's my answer to that question.
Stan, you are a health juggernaut, in all the good ways, just coming full force, huge. This is great. And, with that little vow of yours, I'm almost tempted to say, I don't know if you've heard of this, but I've been listening to a lot of survivor interviews recently, and basically different types of, what would they call it? I mean, this is going to go right out into the fringe here right away, but like basically in trauma-based mind control for asset purposes. I mean, it's alleged this is done in intelligence, has been for a long time, but also organized crime, but also really shady, way darker stuff than that, apparently. And for basically a business, you can get them. Or anyway, so if you're familiar with all this,
no,
so I'm wondering if people would come to you and So it's the crazy amount of quote unquote science behind that of the mind and what they do for the anyway.
You're
So
talking
we,
about
but
you're talking about military based,
yeah, military
psyops that
grade.
are being
Yeah.
used against human beings, and that is my experience. What I also see it on the opposite side. In other words, if you want to get your cells well, it's
Yeah.
very important to see truth. I know you're a truth seeker. It's to
Yes.
see truth, to understand how to discern, which I think our society has
Big
lost their
time.
discernment. There was one time I was going to write a book called, the lost art of discernment. Because we've
huge.
given up our discernment, and we're only into superficial headlines, which are designed as propaganda for the most part. In my experience, I'll always say, for getting into this realm, I'll always say, this is just in my experience. You're just hearing
Of course.
Stan's view on things, and I trust your and other people's discernment. So I don't think there's anything as such as misinformation. I just think there's information, and I trust you to discern. So I see that in the patterns of what's happening in the world. I see it. It's in the educational institutions. It's in the medical institutions. It's in the government. It's in the government institutions. It's in the media institutions. It's also in the movie business as well. Basically, anything we see, feel, or touch, it's in the air. It's in the water, and I can show it to you from a molecular level where it is and what's being targeted. I don't know all the motives, but the patterns would suggest that what you're saying is similar to my experience as well, which is, first it was like, oh, I think some people get sick. Then it was like, oh, well, some people get sick and they seem to be covering that up. And then it's like, all people are sick, and it doesn't seem like there's any transparency, and it looks very intentional, including the technology we see in people. And like, I will show you pictures of unnatural technologies that we see in people. All right, I'll pass to you. I can tell you one.
Well, yeah, no, that's great, because I've got a bunch of stuff here too. I know we could probably go on for days too.
We can.
And you've got to go at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So if you're open, I mean, people that do deprogramming work,
come back.
And therapy work, and actually even I don't like victims, but survivors. So if anybody, I'm sure you could add some expertise in your pattern recognition and things like that. That stuff is fairly insidious, and it has layers and layers and layers of different personalities and safeguards and things in the psyche with, they call it DID now, but it used to be, So anyway, so you have to do that at some other point, because I want to get into, you're actually on the physical hands-on, like microbiology, imaging stuff too, in the studies. So the big questions here with autism, and we talked about this before we came on here, the root causes, and then is there a magic bullet to this too? I know you mentioned a few things already, and also the copper-based blood I find real interesting. I don't know if this is a myth or if there's anything to this, but some people have said that negative RH blood factor is more copper-based, while positive RH factor is more iron-based. I have no idea what this is. I mean, the conductivity of iron is interesting too. So I haven't, but I don't know if that ties in at all. And then you also mentioned, I mean, this is one show about having telepathy abilities for some of these.
Yeah, the telepathy.
Right. So how do you feel about this, as far as, so that's plenty enough for you to work on there. Yeah.
I love how your mind works. So I'm going to start with underlying causes. So what I did originally, and I'll share a screen. I think this one is the one. Yeah. So there were 750 studies, and I'll tell you the end game. The end game is what I found in autism is what we pretty much see in every condition. You rattled off a condition to me, and I showed you in my AI now. I can do this type of research in a couple of minutes, and the AI does what I did when I found 750 studies and took a look at. The next thing I didn't share is that what I did is I had 750 studies, took me 50 months to read, but it broke down into these patterns. One was toxins, heavy metals, pesticides, plastics. Another was infections, bacteria, fungus, parasites, Lyme, and I'll call unnatural technology. Energetic issues, which is Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is the sort of the biology that goes on behind the scenes to make energy, not from a cellular standpoint, but from a fuel standpoint for the cells. Methylation, which is it's involved in the energy systems, the immune regulation, brain chemistry balancing. It's what is like the mixing of the cellular transformations to create metabolites for the Krebs cycle. So methylation is like, that's how you create your DNA, and that's how that's how you create your brain chemistry. So that's important. This is your energy systems, and this is your creation systems. Mitochondria is also the cells specific to energy. So energy issues, infections, toxins, the immune dysregulation, which is usually downstream between the infections and toxins. So that was inflammation, autoimmune reactions, digestive issues. So it's what you're getting and how it's responding to the body. Those 750 studies turned into this. And this is where, if you ask for the magic bullet for what caused it, the way I'd look at it is the pattern I see most is a child that had some sort of infection to begin with. My son had eczema. Eczema, as I've learned, in my view, is a fungal issue. So he was born with fungus on his body, which is called eczema by some. And that is an infection. That infection has a higher ranking of focus than toxins, than toxins. So in other words, your body focuses on this, and it's the same system downstream that takes care of toxins. So if you have an infection on board and you hit any one of these things, you're going to be more toxic. That's why the kids have difficulty excreting mercury, for example. That's my belief. And all the research is being pushed into genetics. And I'm like, the yield has been almost nothing. Billions and billions of dollars for the last 20 years have been put into genetics. And to me, that's just an idea of telling you we're researching something that you can't do anything about. But if you look at this literature, it shows, okay, well, they have bacteria, fungus, parasites, Lyme. Why not figure out what they might have, or do natural things that combat that, see if you see a gain. And that's what I did. And what I ended up seeing in him, once we took care of these other things too, is he had rashes all over his body that did not itch, and they moved from time of day to time of day. And if you read about rashes that move that are non-itchy, non-raised, that can be detox. So I think we lost a bunch of heavy metals and other things once we took care of the infections and the energetic cycles and the immune dysregulation and the foods. But this is
so
what I
the
see
mercury
in everything. Go ahead.
mercury excretion. So you're saying that's a detox. I missed the link there. Why the
so in other words, if so there's a hierarchy your body has. This is what I've learned over time. There's a hierarchy your body considers the most risky thing for its survival. For example, if you have a house, right? And in the house you have trash cans that have trash in it. Well, the trash has to be taken out, or else you've got problems. So the trash is important to take out. So imagine your house and you have the trash, and the trash needs to be taken out. Now, if your trash cans are full or filling, and somebody sets your wall on fire, the trash cans become less important, right? So the fire, which is an infection, is more important than the trash, which is the metals. Now, if you have a fire in your house and your trash cans are building, you're not taking out the trash, you're fighting the fire. Infections are like the fire. That's what I see in the body. So in the face of a bacterial infection that's really hard to kill, or a fungal infection, anaerobic bacteria, or a fungal infection, or also a parasitic infection, this is stuff the body has a really hard time taking care of on its own. And that stuff smolders. I see that as affecting metals release. Now, how do I measure that? Like people say, well, what's your proof? Well, I have a $15,000 mercury vapor meter by Jerome Instruments. Okay. So I can tell you your mercury release now, and then you can eat some sushi and I can tell you what it's like 20 minutes later. So I'm a big person. I'm a big data person, I was just a dad that got into this, right? But I happen to be very logical. I always identified with Mr. Spock on Star Trek, and I'm fun and I'm funny, but you know what? I'm really logical. So I love data. So when in the face of an infection, and I tested this on myself, I actually injected myself with mercury and a virus. Well, said to be virus, but it was junk, let's just say. Mercury and stuff that wasn't so good for me. The mercury did not come out of me. You could have just got
teeth fillings, Stan. But anyway.
Oh yeah, no, I've tested tons of them. They all leached. Okay. 20 years later, they're still leaching toxic levels of mercury to EPA standards, constant. So if anyone has any silver fillings left, that is a huge thing to take care of, but do it well. Do it with a holistic dentist. Make sure you use a rubber dental dam and use suction and ozone and positive air pressure in your nose and something covering your face for the drill, because that stuff is nasty. It's the second worst neurotoxin on the planet is mercury. It's only second to the number one most neurotoxic substance to your brain, which is plutonium. So mercury in silver fillings, and they'll say, well, ethyl versus methyl, it doesn't matter. Give it a different name, a different adjective. It's Mercury. And ultimately, it's very toxic. So now you have a house and you've got some trash and you've got a fire. Now, you could be fighting the fire, but if a tiger comes through the door and starts running after you, that fire becomes less important, right? So, what's the tiger? The tiger is trauma. Believe it or not, the thing that is most important, the most reactive to the body's cells, and I can measure it with a drop of blood, is trauma. And for example, I have had people that have had perfect looking blood after days of work, and they just start trauma bonding or trauma targeting their parents for this one's an alcoholic and this one's codependent, and they just get into that space where you see that their presence is gone, and they're just like, I had one like that. And for 15 minutes he's going off, and he had perfect blood at the time. It was so interesting. It was like the perfect example. And then afterwards he's like, should we check my blood? And I'm like, yeah. And we check it. It looks just like cancer. Just like that. And then we talked about it. We talked about how all things are lessons, and how these things have given him his skills that he's known for and the things that he's famous for in his friend circle. His compassion, his attention to detail, like all those things, his love of fashion, all of it came from those traumas. So once he saw that, and we talked through that, because we do trauma work here too as well. The research includes trauma work. Once he settled and he got back in that place, where you just see presence, checked his blood again, it looked like a 20-year-old perfect blood. So the trauma is the other piece of evidence that I thought was very cool was during the COVID days when we were playing around researching how to take care of COVID, which I had to do because we didn't do the traditional prevention. So, but I was a father and I need to know how to protect my son. So I did a ton of research into other coronaviruses, and there is science in that literature. That's how I got my answers early. Forget COVID-19. It's a coronavirus? All right, fine. Let's look at what other people called coronaviruses and see what they did. I found remedies in that I started using for people and that came to me for help. Every time I started working on them, it started off one time and I thought it was a coincidence. Like I thought it was, oh, interesting. Second time was a coincidence, but it was every time. 24 cases, 24 people in a row. They all shared a trauma that happened at the beginning, just before they got the COVID, or a smoldering childhood thing that was really weighing on them. And that made them, in my view, susceptible to get the infection. In other words, while they're being chased by a tiger, somebody lit their wall on fire and they weren't paying attention. So trauma, stress, lack of connection to source, believing that God's, not in all things, thinking that the things that happened to me that were a surprise aren't a lesson. I'm a victim, like the word you didn't want to use. If you have that mindset that you're trying to prevent something from the past, it is the same thing as a smoldering tiger that is going to stop you from your cells being in their natural state. And because the body is amazing. Like your body has made a million decisions to survive by the time you left your bed to you sat down, right now. And it's like, if we think that isn't magical and powerful, and if we're not in support of what God created, then we're crazy. So the idea of using things that stop the symptoms and not look at the root causes is also crazy. So when we were working on the bodies that were affected by whatever condition this was, trauma. And what I've learned is every time we're in here, like there's a thing on the wall here, it's like a little slogan, and it's like, we have a multifactorial approach, basically is what it's saying, that is healing the mind, body, and soul on a cellular level. And that's kind of where I've landed. It's not just what I was chasing after with my son. It was the fact that I had to heal. And when I was trying things on, I was going to try it on him. One of the things that I did was try it on me first, because I wanted to know the experience of maybe, is it going to have a negative effect? What's it going to feel like? I needed the granular data. When I started trying stuff on myself, my clarity improved. Like one day it was like, holy cow, I've never felt this good in my life. And I had eye tracking issues. I had irritable bowel. I had what you would call ADD. I would have difficulty on a call like this because I would have trouble trying to come up with words back then. And I'd be sweating trying to get this stuff out. And I could do it if I practiced. But now I'm like, I don't like, there's zero practice. Put me in the game, coach, and I have fun, and that's because chasing after something for my son and putting in myself, taking care of me first, which is the thing I didn't want to do after I lost my mom. I was always thinking I would just give. And I put my own needs aside, because how can you have a need when the person you love the most is sitting there getting chemo? How can you complain? So when I unraveled that, and I realized that in order for me to be able to help any person, I have to legitimately take care of this one first, or else I am a friggin' hypocrite. And it had to come to me, and I had to learn it. And once I did that, the way I move now, the way I'm able to take care of things and hold space for whatever, it could be 12 people at the same time going for breakthroughs, I'm having a good time. So, and I don't need sleep as much, and I don't run out of steam. You know, in human design, I'm a projector. We're supposed to work like a couple hours and take a break. There isn't a generator or a manifesting generator that can run ring. I run rings around all of them. I just drill them into the ground. Not that I want to, but that's just how I move. And that happens because of I have clean blood for the most part, and my mind is not the same as it was in trauma, or what I call the spiritual gift God gave you that you decided not to open and call stinky. So you leave it rot in the trauma closet. And eventually that stuff catches up to you and will rot your cells. Anyway, I'll pass there. You've got lots to say.
No, this is great. But I mean, I can confirm this in my own experience. I mean, the first few years of my meditation practice was dealing with this, things that I had forgotten about that were then resurfacing, coming up, and then just lots of weeping, you know, facing it directly, like having my own internal therapist and calling people for forgiveness. So since this seems to be the root and of it, what do you recommend for trauma work for people too? And I also, if you don't mind, like, is there some treatments too for these huge categories of bacterial, or you named a certain type of bacterial thing, fungus, and then there was one other one. Is there, like, I've heard of products like NADS or methyl blue or things like this. Address those three things if there's any commonalities to help people. But the main thing here, and I'm fascinated by trauma healing too, because it is so vitally important in just all walks of life, obviously.
You know what's
so
interesting?
Yeah, if you don't mind going into that now.
If I'm perfectly transparent, which I will be.
And you got to show your slides that you showed me before too, because that's fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. So there's four things you gave me, but this is how your mind works. I actually see the pattern because I've seen lots of brain scans. I know the pattern, and I know metabolites that would support you being able to hold this together easier all the time. But the nice thing is I'm pretty regulated, so I'm going to work through them one at a time.
Well, see, that's the thing. We have so much ground to cover, such a little time. So I throw it out there, and you're going to do all the work.
And we're going to have another time together is what I see. And we can dig in because we're buds from, like, it feels like way back, and we can we can jam on this for a while. As far as how I approach these remedies, it's all person based. So we have what I think is an incredible approach for all these things, but I can't speak to what to do when, because that would be like practicing medicine. I don't do that. I research and I educate. So I do it based on the individual. And I can tell you that I have some of the most amazing remedies out of the 20 years I've seen anybody have in their hands. And I've got stuff that dates back to the 1800s here. I've got stuff that was invented last week, that we made ourselves. I've got lasers, I've got scanners, I've got lots of fun stuff here. And I get
medical books from the 1800s I hear are amazing too, by the way.
I have a really good line on that, actually. And yeah, I can talk about that offline. But yeah, so I can't really just say, well, methylene blue. Well, it's like people say, what do you think of methylene blue? And I'll go, well, for what? And they'll say, I don't know. I just heard it was good. And I'm like, well, I can't answer that because I know what it does. I know what it doesn't do. And the question is, what do you want to do? Or else you're just taking something for the sake of somebody else's excitement, which is the same thing that happens in the communities we judge. And somebody will say to me, do you feel like you're in line with functional medicine or you're in line with alternative, and I'm just like, I'm not any of it. I'm just my own thing in research and in spirituality that is working to improve humans, because I know the downfalls of the people that think they know something that are pitching a supplement, and what's the motive of that? So I'm always looking, somebody hands me a brochure and, well, what do you think of this? I'm like, well, I can verify that there's a dead tree someplace. I can verify that they hired someone to create the logo, that they picked that color. It looks nice, but I see no evidence of anything in front of me. That's as far as I can comment. That's how I approach it, is with real logic, without, trying to be smart or something. I'm just trying to explain, this is how my mind thinks. So what was the other couple things that you wanted me to touch on?
Okay, so I guess there's not it's dependent on the individual for the
it really is
the big type of things. Yeah.
But what I can tell you is
trauma though.
What I have is a set of videos at stansrecoveries.com. And if you were to look down and scroll through some of the things that people said they had, because I don't diagnose and we don't treat, but people came in with certain things and they left without it, or at least they said they did. That's the way you can kind of research and see, and there's bits and pieces in there. And also there's a place where you can hear more about what we do, from a high level anyway. And that's at stanslinks.com. I try to give a lot of wisdom and stuff on there for free, where you can, like this type of discussion, like bits and pieces of this should be on there because if somebody's struggling with that thing like trauma. So let me talk about trauma. But Stan's Links is just a place to look through more of our material. The way I handled trauma is what worked for me. I mean, this is how everything I do is. It's based on me doing something that worked, not me telling somebody about something somebody else said. That's a big mistake, in my view. Like, experiencing it gives you a key to authenticity that helps another person immediately know that what you're saying is authentic. And that's the only way to get to truth. But there's a lot of approaches I have in trauma. The two things is, I'll say the one main thing is, I have a worksheet that it asks you questions to help to identify what happened that wasn't supposed to. And also asks you questions about, what are you most proud of about yourself? Two totally separate polar opposites. Okay. And then in that, what were the costs of you believing that was a negative thing? How did that affect your life? In other words, there was the thing that was this big, and then there's the rest of your life where you beat yourself up over it, or you beat God up, or the other person up for it. Who did the worst harm? It's never the incident. It's always us. And then take a look at, how did that thing benefit you? How did my mother's death make me kinder, softer? I can do wheelies in a wheelchair because I spent lots of time in the hospital and I was bored out of my mind, but I can do a wheelie. Like, I've spent time thinking about, what was the value? If all things came from God and have a value, what was the value? And then I look at, here's what I got from it. I may not endorse cancer. I may not endorse abuse. I work with a lot of people that have been abused, and it's like, well, you don't have to endorse the abuse. What did you learn from it? How did it make you a better mother? How did it make you more aware? How did it, taught you how to deal with being independent, and being accountable? Like, there's a value to everything. Once you really get into the practice of understanding that there's a value to everything, and that's how this place works, that there's only up to 240 traumas, by the way. I've documented, like, one's called grief, another one's called betrayal. There's 240. Once you understand there's 240 and you have a lifetime to figure them out, and each time you do it, you become a better puzzle master when the next thing comes along. Look at it logically. It's a finite number, which tells me it was created, not accidental. Once you get to that mindset and you have some perspective in life, there's not much to defend, because anything that happens is going to be of value. Somebody comes in here and lights the place on fire, I'm going to learn something. So it's not like I have to go, good job lighting it on fire. It's going to be like, okay, this is interesting. Much better than, oh my God. Yeah. So that's the type of work. I'm giving it to you as like a general. That's the type of work that we do to help people see the truth. And if you do see the truth in its entirety is never trauma, only gifts that were very special and surprising.
I would say about 80% of that I'm on board with, where I get hung up with, it's the golden question, right? What if the worst things that ever happened to me were the greatest gift I've ever been given? Yes, in retrospect, this is great because, otherwise it's not going to be helpful. We need to make the most of what has happened. And at the same time, abuse is never okay. And I don't want,
that's where you're stuck. But here's what I'm going to say. I'm not
okay, but hang on, but yeah. I know, but we have to flesh this out logically, because if it would be like,
we're gonna leave a cliffhanger. I love it. It's okay. No, go.
I just don't want to give allowance to certain beings to say, okay,
you don't need to.
oh, we're just here to help you, and sit there and
No,
basically torture you the entire time.
no, no,
So
no.
if we weren't here to wake you up and to cause this abuse, then your growth would, so I just don't want to give it.
I got this one. All right.
Okay, okay, great.
Let me
Yeah,
take it.
sure, please. Yeah,
Okay. So I don't endorse cancer. I don't endorse child abuse or sexual abuse. Okay.
sure.
But it happened to me. And now it's up to me. And
Yes, that's
the
what I
way
mean.
I look at it is cancer, I don't endorse it, but I bless that God used cancer as a pawn to take my mother out, to activate me. When I start to think like that, cancer becomes less personal. The person that attacked me, I don't need to endorse them to their face. Definitely not.
Exactly.
But when I step back and if I take personalities out of it,
Totally
that's
agree.
God's way to hit me with something that's so painful, that makes me sit with and cycle for so long.
Sure.
It actually gets this stubborn person to realize what God was trying to tell me. And I don't need to go back and say, thank you for doing the abuse. In fact, if it's in front of me, my logic says to stop it. I'm compassionate. I'm not like I'm happy with all things. I'm happy with all things that happened to me in the end, but I'm still a person as it happens, and I'll deal with the rest later. But I see cancer as a pawn God used. I see autism as a pawn God used. And if somebody comes in and says, I need help with autism, I don't say, no, it's the best thing that's ever happened to you. That would be nuts. I say, let's sit down and let's work this thing. And I'll say, oh, well, it looks like this might have been a trigger. You should consider not doing that. But it's two separate things. In the end, when the dust settles, what did I get from this? And I've spent time with this, so I know I got my awakening. I have more joy in my life today than I've ever had any time in my life because I'm settled in it. But I had to get through it. And I also had to allow that God's in all things. And I may not like how my present is delivered. I may not like it, but I'm also stubborn. And sometimes I needed that to get the punch in the face to settle in and see what the message is, because unfortunately it doesn't come in a scroll. Typically it doesn't come in words. It has to come in an approach that is a surprise. And in order for it to be a surprise, sometimes it has to be morally questionable, and only then I can understand real spirituality. I have to be challenged to accept that these things can happen, and then I'm going to learn from it, because otherwise it's on the opposite side of my faith. And if it's on the opposite side of my faith, I will suffer. And if I can extend my faith to understand that all things are guided, then I can have peace and joy.
Well, Stan, I appreciate that approach too. I will come out with just a little bit different, but I think we're in total agreement that, if it's already happened, there's no need to, the personality, it's not a personal thing, that there's I would just say defilements involved that has nothing to do with the person, and that our actions, intentional actions, and our intentional speech has consequences, and there's cause and effect as well. And so that way it comes into personal responsibility as well. And we've got the deputy sheriff of karma in there as well, and a very vast, complex process, many causes and conditions involved. And yes, and is in being committed to non-harming for myself to help prevent these things, and at the same time, how do we learn from what's happened, and how do we work towards the skillful and away from the unskillful?
Absolutely.
And yeah, okay,
and
Stan,
and I see you inviting me back for us to continue this more.
We probably, because we didn't get to the
amazing slides of the technology that we're going to take out of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it leaves a great cliffhanger for later.
Okay.
Why not?
Well,
we're patient people.
All right.
Lots of love, brother. Lots of love.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for watching and listening, and may all beings everywhere realize awakening, be free.